doesn't exist. General Whitaker's aide set the personal file on the table empty. Completely empty. No unit, no service record. Nothing. Whitaker didn't look at the file. He was staring at the frozen satellite image on the screen, a woman walking alone off a ridge with a Barrett M82 across her back, calm as someone leaving a grocery store behind her. 6 of his best operators were alive because of what she'd done from 2,200 meters in the dark. His jaw tightened. "She saved my entire team," he said. "And you're telling me she doesn't exist?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you." The first thing Colonel Darnell Hughes noticed when he walked into the forward command shelter was the rifle. It was propped against the far wall like it belonged there. Like it had always been there. Like whoever carried it had decided this particular corner of this particular building was a perfectly reasonable place to rest a weapon that weighed 28 pounds and could put a round through an engine block from a mile and a half away. The Barrett M82. Semi-automatic. A rifle so large and so brutally powerful that most operators referred to it as a crew-served weapon, not something one person carried alone across desert terrain in the dark. Hughes stood in the doorway for a moment and stared at it. Then he looked at the woman sitting 3 feet away, field stripping a secondary pistol with the calm, methodical focus of someone who had nothing better to do on a Tuesday morning. She was not young. She was not performing anything. She did not look up when he entered. "Ma'am," Hughes said carefully, "this area is restricted." "I restricted it." He opened his mouth, closed it, looked again at the M82, looked at the small identification pin resting on the table beside her cleaning kit, half hidden under a strip of field gauze. He couldn't see it clearly enough to read it, but something about its shape made the back of his neck go cold. "General Whitaker is on his way," Hughes said. "He's going to want a full explanation." The woman set the pistol frame down on the table, picked up a bore brush, and began working it through the barrel. "I know that too," she said. 40 minutes earlier, SEAL Team Bravo Echo had stumbled out of the mountains looking like men who had survived a building collapse. Sergeant First Class Dominic Reyes was the first one through the door, and he sat down on the floor of the medical bay without saying a single word, which told the corpsman on duty everything she needed to know about how the night had gone. The others came in behind him. 6 operators, all moving, all breathing, all carrying that particular kind of silence that combat veterans wear when they have processed something their minds have not yet caught up to. Lieutenant Commander Jared Voss, the team lead, did not go to the medical bay. He went directly to the command shelter, and he stood in front of the wall-mounted screen where the satellite replay was still running, and he watched the footage for 3 minutes without blinking. "She was already there," he said finally. Hughes was standing beside him. "Say again?" "When we hit the first ambush point, that kill zone on the North Ridge, she was already there. Already set up. Already tracking." Voss pointed at the timestamp in the corner of the frame. "This shot happened 4 seconds after the first enemy contact. 4 seconds. Nobody positions that fast. She was already on them before we even knew they were there." Hughes said nothing. "She knew where they were going to be," Voss said. "That's not reaction time, that's foreknowledge." The word hung in the air between them like something neither man wanted to touch. Foreknowledge. In a mission that had been running on compartmentalized intelligence. In a mission where the team's movement had been kept strictly need to know. In a mission where the enemy had somehow impossibly, inexplicably known exactly where Bravo Echo would be and exactly when they would arrive. Voss turned to Hughes. "Who authorized her presence on this operation?" "Nobody," Hughes said quietly. "That's the problem." General Marcus Whitaker had been a 4-star for 3 years, and before that he had spent 2 decades inside the Special Operations community, working his way up through every grade of difficulty the U. military could invent. He had commanded SEAL units in 4 different theaters. He had written doctrine that was still being used. He had sat across tables from foreign heads of state and across interrogation rooms from men who wanted to kill him, and in all of that time, in all of those rooms, he had developed a very precise ability to read situations the moment he walked into them. He walked into the forward command shelter and read this one immediately. Hughes standing rigid near the door. Voss standing by the screen with his arms folded, jaw set, eyes burning, and across the room, seated at the utility table with the M82 propped against the wall behind her like a statement, a woman in worn tactical gear who was apparently in no particular hurry to explain herself. Whitaker stopped 2 feet inside the door. His eyes moved to the M82, then to the woman, then to the small pin on the table that he could not yet see clearly enough to identify. "2 general on deck," Hughes said. Nobody moved. The woman looked up. Whitaker looked at her face. She was probably mid-40s. Weathered but not hard. The kind of face that had been through enough that it had stopped performing anything for anyone. She met his gaze without flinching, without deference, without any of the instinctive straightening that most people did when a 4-star walked into the room. She just looked at him, like she had been waiting, like she had done this before. "General Whitaker," she said. Her voice was level, not defiant, not apologetic, just level. "I don't know your name," Whitaker said. His voice was the voice he used when he was containing something very large. "I don't know your unit. I don't know who authorized your presence in my operation. And that is a situation I intend to correct in the next 5 minutes." The woman set her cleaning brush down. "Yes, sir," she said. "I expected that. Then let's start simple. Who are you?" She didn't answer immediately. She reached forward and picked up the small pin from the table, turned it once in her fingers, almost absently. The way a person handles something they have carried so long, it has become part of the weight of their hands. Then she set it back down, face up. Whitaker stepped forward to see it clearly. Stopped. He recognized the symbol. He had seen it exactly once before, in a classified file that had been handed to him in a windowless room at a location he was not allowed to name, part of a briefing that had been given to exactly 4 people in the entire military. He had been told at the end of that briefing that the program no longer existed. He had been told the records were sealed. He had been told very specifically that the personnel files were classified beyond his clearance level, which, at the time, had struck him as strange, because at the time he had been a 3-star general with full access to every special operations program in the inventory. He stared at the pin. Then he looked at her. "What is your name?" he said, differently now. "Queter Commander Evelyn Carter," she said. The name meant nothing to Hughes. He filed it away and waited. It meant something to Voss. He uncrossed his arms. It meant something to Whitaker. He took a long, controlled breath through his nose and stood very still for a moment, which was the closest he ever came to showing that something had surprised him. "Carter," he said. "Yes, sir. You're going to tell me everything." "I know," she said. "That's why I'm still here." She started at the beginning. Not the beginning of the night, the beginning of why she was there at all. 3 weeks earlier, she had received a contact through a channel that did not appear in any official directory. It had used a verification code, a specific one. The kind of code that existed in a system so compartmentalized that most people with top-secret clearance had never heard of it, because the system that governed that code had been officially discontinued 7 years ago. "Someone reached out to you," Whitaker said. "Someone who knew I existed," she said. "That narrows the field considerably. How many people know you exist?" She looked at him steadily. "Including you now?" "Approximately 9. The number hit the room like a stone hitting water." Hughes looked at Voss. Voss looked at the floor. "The contact told me that Operation Silent Horizon had been compromised," Evelyn continued. "Not possibly compromised, not at risk compromised. Past tense. Before the mission launched." Whitaker's jaw tightened. "You're telling me someone knew about the intelligence breach before my team was on the ground?" "Someone knew," she said. The question they couldn't answer was where the leak was coming from. They needed confirmation. They needed someone inside the operational perimeter who could observe the engagement and identify the pattern. "Identify the pattern," Whitaker repeated. "Enemy forces with advanced knowledge of your team's movement will position differently than enemy forces operating on tactical instinct," Evelyn said. "The setup I saw on that north ridge was not reactive. Those positions were prepared. They were waiting at specific coordinates that corresponded exactly to your team's planned route that was finalized 14 hours before insertion and shared with a total of 11 people." Voss made a sound that wasn't quite a word. 11 people, Whitaker said very carefully. 11 people, she confirmed. The contact wanted me to confirm whether the engagement pattern matched a setup built on foreknowledge. Conclusively. The room was very quiet. Whitaker walked to the table. He stood across from her with his hands clasped behind his back. And he looked down at the pin, and then he looked at her face. And the expression on his face was one that Hughes had never seen on the general before, something that lived in the space between fury and grief. "You were watching my team get walked into a trap," he said. "You waited. I needed the pattern to be conclusive," she said. "I needed the enemy to commit to their positions. The confirmation would hold up. 6 of my operators were never in terminal danger," she said. And her voice did not change. "I was tracking every threat position from the moment your team made first contact. I had solutions on 4 primary targets before your team's point man identified the first muzzle flash. I waited as long as I could wait and still guarantee extraction." "How long was that?" 11 seconds. Whitaker stared at her. The window between a firefight that is controlled and one that becomes uncontrollable in that terrain. With that enemy density given your team's ammunition state and position 11 seconds, she said. I acted at second 8. Lieutenant Commander Voss had been standing quietly at the edge of the conversation, absorbing it the way he absorbed everything in the field systematically, without editorial cataloging each piece as it arrived. But there was something working behind his eyes that Hughes could see building, and when Evelyn said 11 seconds, Voss finally spoke. Second 8, he said. She looked at him. My point man Reyes was about to break left, Voss said. If he had broken left, he would have stepped into the secondary kill zone. The covered approach, the one they would have used to finish us. Yes, she said. Your first shot pulled the threat that was positioning to trigger that secondary, Voss said. You weren't just engaging targets, you were managing the geometry of the entire engagement. Yes, Voss was quiet for a moment. From how far out, he asked. She glanced at the M82 against the wall. Hughes said quietly. No, I want to know, Voss said. He looked back at Evelyn. Because I've been doing the math since I watched that footage, and I want to know if what I'm calculating is actually possible. Evelyn said nothing. 1,900 meters. 2,000. She held his gaze. 2,200, she said. Voss looked at the M82. He looked at it for a long time in darkness, he said. Partial ambient light from the valley settlements, she said. And I knew the target's positions before they moved into them. I had time to calculate. You had time, Voss said. Not sarcastically, just quietly. The way a person says something that is too large to process all at once. Right, Whitaker had not moved. He was still standing across the table, and his eyes were still on Evelyn's face. And behind the controlled surface of his expression, something was happening that Hughes could feel from across the room. General was reassessing, not the mission, not the operational failure, not the security breach, though all of those things would need to be reassessed, thoroughly and painfully in the hours and days ahead. He was reassessing her. 11 people, he said, returning to it. Who knew the route? 11, she confirmed. I was one of them, yes. You're not telling me I'm the leak. No, she said. You're not the leak. But you are on the list, which means the investigation will need to account for your clearances, your communications, and your movements in the 72 hours preceding the mission. Well, everyone else on that list. Whitaker absorbed this. You understand what you're asking me to authorize, he said. I understand exactly what I'm asking, she said, and I understand why it's uncomfortable. But 6 of your operators are in that medical bay right now because someone on that list decided their lives were acceptable collateral. I'd like you to be as uncomfortable as necessary. The words landed flat and clean. Without drama, without apology, Hughes held his breath. Whitaker looked at her for a very long moment. Then, almost imperceptibly, something in his posture shifted. Where is the confirmation package, he said. Encrypted. Cured off-site. Keyed to a release code that I control, she paused. I'll release it when the investigation is formally authorized. And the lead investigator is someone not on the list of 11. You don't trust my chain of command. I don't trust anyone I haven't vetted, she said simply. That's not personal, that's operational. Hughes watched the general walk to the far side of the room and stand with his back to the table for a moment. It was the closest thing to pacing that a man with Whitaker's discipline would allow himself. Came back. You were part of a program, Whitaker said. A classified training evaluation program. Discontinued 7 years ago. Officially discontinued, she said. The records were sealed. The official records were sealed. Whitaker looked at the pin again. And unofficially? For the first time, something moved in her expression. Something quieter. Unofficially, she said. Programs end on paper and continue in practice. The work was valuable. The people were valuable. The classification just changed. To what level? She looked at him steadily. Above yours, General. The silence that followed was very long. Voss exhaled slowly through his nose. Hughes found that he was gripping his own forearm without having decided to do that. Whitaker looked at the M82 against the wall. The long, brutal, impossible weapon that had been fired from a position nobody had identified, at a distance nobody had thought practical in darkness, with a wind that the meteorology team had logged at 18 knots, gusting to 23. He looked at it, the way a person looks at something they are trying to fit into a framework they are no longer sure applies. Commander Carter, he said, General. In 30 years of special operations, he said. I have never had a conversation like this one, I expect not, she said. I need you to understand something, he said. What happened tonight, the breach, the operation, the fact that someone on my trusted list burned 6 of my operators, that is going to require a response that goes very high and goes very fast. And the person who handed us that six-man rescue is sitting at a table in my forward command shelter and won't tell me what level of classification she operates under." He paused. "I need to understand who I'm dealing with." Evelyn was quiet for a moment. Then she did something Hughes had not expected. She reached up and unzipped her outer tactical jacket. Slowly, deliberately. She set the jacket aside. The uniform underneath was simple. Worn. The kind of wear that comes from years of actual use, not display. She sat straight in her chair and the overhead light caught the insignia on her chest, and every person in that room read it at the same time. Hughes stopped breathing. Voss took one step forward. Whitaker stood very still, because above the standard uniform markings, above the rank designator, centered on her chest with the quiet permanence of something that had been there for a very long time, was a SEAL trident. Not a replica, not an honorary insignia, the real thing. Worn and slightly dulled from years of contact with field gear, but unmistakably, undeniably real. Whitaker stared at it. Knew the trident. He had worn one himself for 17 years before the stars began accumulating on his collar. He knew what it cost. He knew exactly what a person had to survive to earn it. He knew the brotherhood that came with it, the history. Wait, he had never in 30 years seen one on a woman. Not because he believed it was impossible, but because he knew with the certainty of a man who had access to the complete SEAL community roster that there were no women in the program. There had never been officially. He looked at the trident. Then he looked at her face. "How?" he said. It was the first time all night that the word had come out of him without the full force of command behind it. It was just a question, just a man asking a question. "The program I was part of," she said quietly, "wasn't designed to evaluate whether women could become SEALs. It was designed to evaluate whether the selection criteria being used for certain specialized roles were actually predictive of operational effectiveness. Whether the standards were measuring the right things." She paused. They were not. The program found something different. The program found that in certain categories of specialized long-range work, patience, thermal regulation, target acquisition in degraded conditions, decision-making under extended isolation, the results were not what anyone expected, and you were in that program. "I was the program," she said simply. "I was the first. I was the only one who completed the full evaluation. And when the results came in, the people running it had a choice about what to do with that information. They classified it," Whitaker said. "They classified me," she said. "The room absorbed that." Hughes was looking at the trident and doing math he couldn't complete because the numbers didn't add up against any framework he had been given. Voss was looking at the M82 and thinking about Reyes stepping left, about the geometry of the secondary kill zone, about 8 seconds and 11 seconds and 2,200 meters in partial darkness with an 18-knot wind. Whitaker was looking at Evelyn Carter and trying to reconcile the woman at the table with every assumption he had carried with him for 30 years. Not because the assumptions were malicious, but because they had been structural, foundational, part of the framework on which he had built his entire understanding of the community he led. And the framework was wrong. Not partially wrong. Not wrong in a way that could be adjusted around the edges. Wrong in a way that had been proven, documented, classified, and buried, and was now sitting across from him in a forward command shelter in the middle of nowhere, having just saved 6 of his people from a trap that one of his own had built for them. "Commander Carter," he said, "General, I have 6 operators in the medical bay," he said. "All because of you. Because of circumstances," she said. "Don't do that," he said quietly. He looked at him. "Don't diminish it," he said. "Not in front of me." Something moved in her expression again. Briefer this time. "Gone almost before it arrived. 6 operators," he said again. "Families at home. Children. The kind of loss that doesn't stay in the mountain. Travels back, it lands on doorsteps." He stopped for a moment. "You were the reason those families don't get that knock tonight." Evelyn said nothing. "That matters to me," Whitaker said. "Whatever comes next, the investigation, the breach, the 11 people, and whoever did this, that matters to me. And so does the person who prevented it, the moment held." Outside, somewhere on the other side of the base, someone was running. The sound of boots on packed earth, someone moving quickly, carrying news or carrying orders, the ordinary percussion of a military installation at 2 in the morning. Inside the shelter, nobody moved. Then Evelyn reached forward and picked up the pin from the table. She turned it once in her fingers. She looked at it the way she had looked at it before, not sentimental, not detached, just familiar. The way a person looks at something that has been true for a very long time. She set it back down. "The investigation," she said. "When do you want to begin?" Whitaker looked at her for one more moment. Then he turned to Hughes. "Get me a secure line," he said. "And clear this shelter. I want every non-essential person off this base within the hour. Hughes moved. Voss moved. And Evelyn Carter sat at the table with the M82 against the wall behind her and the pin on the table in front of her. And she waited with the patience of a person who had spent years in the dark, dead still, watching, measuring exactly how many seconds remained before the window closed. She was very good at waiting. She always had been. The secure line took 9 minutes to establish. Whitaker stood with his back to the room while Hughes worked the communications equipment. And in those 9 minutes nobody spoke. Evelyn sat at the table. The M82 stood against the wall. The pin sat face up on the utility surface between them like a small, quiet fact that nobody in the room had fully processed yet. Voss hadn't left when Whitaker told the non-essentials to clear out. He'd moved to the far corner and stood there with his arms at his sides. And Whitaker had looked at him for a moment and made a decision not to order him out. Voss had 6 operators in the medical bay that bought him the right to stand in the corner. When the line opened, Whitaker spoke for 4 minutes without interruption. Hughes could only hear one side of it, but the silences on Whitaker's end were long, which meant the person on the other end was talking a great deal, which meant the news was traveling fast in whatever direction. News traveled at 3 in the morning when a 4-star called a secure line and used the words operational compromise and confirmed breach and 11 personnel in the same sentence. When he hung up, he turned around. The investigation is authorized, he said. Lead investigator will be Deputy Inspector General Carolyn Marsh. Evelyn nodded once. She'll be here in 6 hours, Whitaker said. Until then, nothing leaves this room, understood, Evelyn said. Whitaker pulled a chair from against the wall and sat down across from her. Not behind the table, not at a distance. Directly across, 3 feet between them, the way a person sits when they've decided that the formal structure of the last 2 hours is no longer the most useful tool available. I want to understand the timeline, he said. Not for the investigation. For me, Evelyn looked at him. 3 weeks ago someone contacted you, he said. Through a channel that doesn't exist. Using a code from a system that was discontinued. Walk me through what happened from that moment to the moment you pulled that trigger. She was quiet for a beat. Not hesitating. The contact came through a relay, she said. Indirect, multiple steps. By the time it reached me, the origination point was scrubbed. But the verification code was valid. Meant the person who sent it had access to a system that only a very small number of people know exists. How small? Smaller than 11, she said. Whitaker absorbed that. Someone above the breach. Someone who knew about the breach but couldn't act on it directly, she said. Someone who needed a mechanism that existed outside the official structure. Outside the 11. They came to you. They came to me because I'm not in any system that the 11 could access, she said. If someone on that list ran my name through every database available to their clearance level, they'd get nothing. No service record, no assignment history. No photograph. Nothing. The empty file, Whitaker said quietly. The empty file, she confirmed. Voss made a sound from the corner. Not a word. Just the sound of a man connecting something. So whoever tipped you off, Voss said, knew that the only way to get someone inside this operation without alerting the leak was to use someone the leak couldn't find. Correct, Evelyn said. Which means the person who tipped you off also knew about you, Voss said. Which means they have clearance above the list of 11. Which means we're not just looking for a leak inside the operational chain. We're looking at a situation where someone with very high clearance suspected someone else with very high clearance. The room held that for a moment. Whitaker looked at the table. He looked at it the way a man looks at a surface when he's doing calculations that don't fit comfortably inside his head. The people who classified you, he said to Evelyn. The ones who ran the program. Are any of them still active? Some, she said. Could one of them have made this contact? She paused. It was the first real pause she'd given him, not measuring. But something else, something more careful. Possibly, she said. Not a yes, it's not a no either, she said. What I can tell you is that the contact knew things about Operation Silent Horizon that required either very high clearance or very close proximity to the planning process. 2 possibilities are not mutually exclusive. Whitaker looked up at her. You think it could be both? I think the person who warned me about this breach may have done so because they were close enough to the planning process to recognize the contamination, and high enough to know they couldn't report it through channels without alerting the source. A witness who couldn't be a witness, Whitaker said. A witness who needed a proxy, she said. The word sat between them. Whitaker leaned back in his chair. He pressed the heel of his hand against his jaw for a moment. A gesture so human and so tired that it briefly dissolved the 4 stars and the 30 years, and left just a man in a room at 3 in the morning trying to hold something very large together. 11 people, he said. I need to think about each of them. We have 6 hours, Evelyn said. We can start now if you want. He looked at her. Something shifted in his expression, not exactly surprise, but an adjustment, a recalibration. The kind that happens when a person realizes the individual across from them is operating at a level they had not initially assigned. All right, he said, let's start. Hughes brought coffee. Nobody asked for it, but he brought it anyway, setting 3 cups on the table with the quiet efficiency of someone who understood that long nights required fuel regardless of what anyone said about not needing it. Evelyn wrapped both hands around her cup and let the heat work into her fingers. And for the first time since Whitaker had walked into the shelter, he looked briefly genuinely tired. Not weak, tired. There was a difference, and the people in that room all understood it. Walk me through the 11, Whitaker said. I'll give you names. You tell me what you've already observed. I haven't run full assessments on all of them, she said. I had 3 weeks and limited resources. I focused on the nodes most likely to have both access and motive. How many did you assess? 7. Results? 4 clear. 3 flagged. Whitaker set his coffee down very carefully. 3 flagged, he said. Behavioral indicators only, she said. Not confirmation. The engagement pattern confirms that the leak existed and that it was precise. The enemy had the route, the timing, and the team composition. That level of specificity requires either direct access to the operational order or access to the communication channel through which the order was transmitted, which narrows it. Significantly, she said. The operational order in final form was held by 4 people. Of the 11 total who had route information, 7 received partial packages, sector coordinates, insertion window, general objective. Only 4 had the complete picture. Whitaker's jaw tightened. Tell me the 4. You already know the 4, she said quietly. He did. He knew the moment she said it. The operational order in final, complete form had been held by himself, his chief of staff, Colonel Raymond Briggs, the intelligence officer who assembled the package, Major Derek Olson, and the liaison officer from the agency, a man named Patrick Sellers, who technically didn't appear on military rosters, but whom Whitaker had worked with on 3 previous operations. 4 people himself. Briggs, Olson, Sellers. He looked at Evelyn. You've already assessed them, he said. It wasn't a question. I've assessed 3 of the 4, she said. Which 3? She held his gaze steadily. Briggs, Olson, Sellers, and the 4th. The 4th is you, she said. I didn't assess you. Why not? The question came out flat, without ego, without defensiveness, a genuine operational question. Why would an assessor skip the most powerful node on the list? Because you're the one who's going to authorize the investigation, she said. If you were the source, you would have had 6 hours since the operation failed to begin managing the outcome. You haven't done that. Instead, you're sitting across from me at 3 in the morning asking me to give you names. She paused. People who burn their own operators don't spend 6 hours trying to find out who did it. That's not a rigorous methodology, Whitaker said. No, she agreed, but it's accurate. Another silence. Voss shifted his weight in the corner. Briggs, Whitaker said. What did you find? Briggs is complicated, she said. His financial profile over the last 18 months shows patterns that are inconsistent with his salary and his lifestyle history. Not dramatic. Not obvious. Subtle, the kind of subtle that either means he's very careful or means it's coincidental. Which do you think it is? I don't make determinations on behavioral data alone, she said. But I flagged it. Olson has a brother, she said. Younger. Currently in a situation overseas that creates leverage possibilities. I flagged it not because I believe he's the source, but because leverage is the most reliable mechanism for this type of breach, and a person with an exploitable family connection is a person with exposure. Sellers, she paused again. Whitaker noticed the pause. Sellers, he said again. Sellers is the one I flagged hardest, she said. Not because of what I found. Because of what I didn't find. Explain. Patrick Sellers has been a liaison officer for 11 years, she said. In 11 years of operations across 4 theaters, should have generated a certain volume of administrative documentation, travel records, communication logs, requisition forms, personnel interactions. When I went looking for that documentation through the access I have, I found approximately 30% of what should exist. Whitaker stared at her. The rest was removed. The rest is missing, she said carefully. Removal implies intent. Missing implies possibility. But operational documentation doesn't misplace itself. Someone scrubbed his trail, Voss said from the corner. Someone scrubbed portions of his trail, Evelyn said. Selectively. The selections are interesting. Interesting how? The missing documentation clusters around 3 specific time periods, she said. Each of those periods corresponds to an operation that later experienced an intelligence anomaly. Not a confirmed breach, an anomaly. The kind that gets written off as coincidence or enemy adaptation. She looked at Whitaker directly. I pulled the after-action reports on all 3. And the anomalies in those operations look like the anomaly in this one, she said. Same pattern, same specificity, same characteristic of an enemy force that knew more than the intelligence environment should have allowed. The quiet in the room had a different texture now. Hughes had stopped moving. He was standing against the wall with his coffee cup in his hand. Not drinking it, just holding it, because the thing Evelyn had just laid on the table was not a suspicion or a theory or a behavioral flag. It was a pattern. Across 4 operations, across 11 years. Sellers has been doing this for 11 years, Whitaker said. The words came out slowly, each one carrying weight. I don't know that, she said. I know that his missing documentation and the operational anomalies share a timeline. I know that this operations breach is the most explicit example of a pattern I've been tracking across historical data for the last 3 weeks. I know that the specificity of the intelligence the enemy had tonight route, timing, team composition is consistent with access to the complete operational order, which Sellers had, she confirmed. Whitaker stood up from the chair. He walked to the far side of the room, and this time it was actual pacing, controlled but actual, and Hughes pressed himself closer to the wall to give him space. If Sellers has been operational for 11 years, Whitaker said, not turning around, then what we're looking at is not a breach. It's an infiltration. Long-term, systematic, deliberate infiltration of special operations intelligence. Yes, Evelyn said. The operations that showed anomalies, he said. How many people didn't come home from those operations? She was quiet for a moment. 17, she said. Whitaker stopped pacing. The number went through the room like something physical. 17, not an abstraction. 17 operators. 17 people with names and families and histories, who had gone out on missions and hadn't come back. Across operations that shared a pattern with tonight's engagement. Across a timeline that ran parallel to Patrick Sellers' career. Pushed off from the wall. I need some air, he said. And his voice was very controlled, which meant the opposite of what it said. Voss, Whitaker said. I'll be right outside, Voss said. He walked to the door and went through it without looking at anyone. And the sound of his boots on the packed earth outside lasted for about 10 steps and then stopped. He wasn't getting air. He was standing 6 feet from the door, holding himself together, and everyone in the room knew it. Whitaker turned around. The confirmation package you mentioned, he said. The encrypted file. What's in it? Imagery from tonight's engagement showing the enemy position setup, she said. Time-stamped communication intercepts that I was provided during the approach, showing coordination between enemy forces and an external signal source. And the pattern analysis I described the historical cross-reference between Sellers' missing documentation and the operational anomaly timeline. That's enough for an arrest. It's enough for a detainment pending investigation, she said. An arrest requires more. Where is Sellers right now? Whitaker looked at Hughes. Hughes was already on a secondary radio finding out, he said. 30 seconds passed. Hughes looked up. Sellers checked out of the forward operating location at 2200 hours, he said. Signed out a vehicle. Said he was returning to the regional coordination hub. Whitaker looked at the clock on the wall. 2200 was before the mission. Results would have been fully transmitted. Before the recovery of the SEAL team had been confirmed. Before anyone would have officially known that the operation had failed, but the operators had survived. He left before he knew we got them out, Whitaker said. He left, Hughes said carefully, before the outcome was confirmed, which meant one of 2 things. Either Sellers had left for entirely routine reasons that would look suspicious in hindsight, or Sellers had left because he had already received a report through his own channel, a channel that would have told him what the enemy knew, which was that the SEAL team had been in the kill zone. A channel that would not have told him about Evelyn Carter, because nobody had known about Evelyn Carter. He thinks they're dead, Voss said from outside. Everyone looked at the door. Voss was standing in the doorway, his voice carrying in from outside even and flat. Set them up. He thinks the operation worked, Voss said. He's not running because he failed, he's leaving because he thinks he succeeded. Whitaker looked at Evelyn. If he gets to the regional hub and checks in before we can detain him, Whitaker said, he'll have time to manage his communication record. Yes, she said. How long to the regional hub? 90 minutes by vehicle, Hughes said. Whitaker checked the clock again. He's been gone approximately 50 minutes, Hughes said. 40 minutes of travel remaining. Sellers was driving at a normal pace, thinking he was leaving a successful operation, not rushing, not running 40 minutes. Whitaker looked at Evelyn. I don't have authority to detain him without the investigation formally in motion, he said. Marsh doesn't arrive for 6 hours. If he reaches the hub, he won't reach the hub, Evelyn said. Whitaker stopped. What do you mean, the vehicle he signed out, she said. The ignition system on that class of vehicle uses a remote accessible module for fleet management. Can be disabled remotely. Whitaker stared at her. You already know which vehicle he took. I know which vehicle he took, she said. I've known his exit plan since yesterday. The room went completely still. You anticipated this, Whitaker said. Not accusing. Just absorbing. I anticipated that the source, if my assessment was correct, would attempt to exit the operational area after the mission window closed, she said. I positioned accordingly. You can stop the vehicle. I can disable the vehicle, she said. He'll be stationary on the road. He won't be detained. I don't have that authority, and neither do you until Marsh authorizes. But he won't be at the hub, and he won't be able to manage his communication record. And when Marsh arrives, he'll be exactly where we need him to be. Whitaker looked at her for a long moment. Do it, he said. She reached into a pocket of her tactical jacket and removed a small device, a modified communicator. Compact and custom. The kind of hardware that didn't come from any procurement catalog. She entered a sequence. She set the device on the table. Done, she said. Somewhere out on the desert road, Patrick Sellers' vehicle rolled to a stop. The engine cut. The lights stayed on for a moment, and then those cut too. And a man who had spent 11 years feeding information to people who used it to kill American operators sat in the dark on a dirt road with no signal and no explanation, and the slowly arriving understanding that something had gone wrong. Not for the operation for him. Whitaker sat back down. He picked up his coffee cup. It was cold. He drank it anyway. 6 hours, he said. 6 hours, she confirmed. Then we wait, she said. Outside, Voss came back through the door. He looked at Evelyn. He looked at the device on the table. He looked at Whitaker. Is it done? It's done, Whitaker said. Voss nodded. He went back to his corner. He stood there with his arms at his sides and his eyes forward, and he looked like a man who was doing the very careful, very deliberate work of keeping himself from feeling the full weight of what 17 meant until he was somewhere private enough to let it land. Hughes quietly refilled the coffee cups. Nobody spoke for a while. The night held its position outside, dark and still and indifferent, the way the desert always was when things happened inside it that it would never record. And in the command shelter, 4 people sat with a story that was too classified to tell and too large to contain, and waited for morning to come and bring with it the machinery of consequence. Evelyn's hands were wrapped around her coffee cup again. She was watching the door, not because she expected anyone to come through it, because watching exits was something she had never been able to stop doing, even in rooms where she was the most dangerous thing present. Old habits, from old training, the kind that saved your life so many times that your nervous system refused to let them go. Whitaker noticed. How long have you been doing this? He said. Quietly. Not officially. Just a question between 2 people at 4 in the morning. He considered the question. Which part, she said. All of it. The isolation, the classified existence. The work that nobody records. She turned her coffee cup once in her hands. Long enough, she said, that I stopped counting. Do you have people? He said. Family. Anyone who knows what you actually do. The question was personal. He knew it was personal. He asked it anyway. Because it was 4 in the morning, and 17 people were dead, and 6 were alive, and the woman across from him had been carrying an M82 in a secret for longer than some of his operators had been in uniform, and it seemed like the kind of question that deserved to be asked at least once. She looked at him. I have the work, she said. It wasn't sad. It wasn't defiant. It was just true, delivered with the same level cadence she used for everything else, and somehow that made it heavier than either alternative. Whitaker nodded. He didn't push. He understood that answer. He had given versions of it himself in different rooms, at different hours when someone had asked about the cost of 30 years of this kind of service. He understood that some people measured their lives in the people they saved rather than the people they kept close, and that those 2 currencies didn't always trade in the same market. When Marsh gets here, he said, I'm going to need you to walk her through everything you've told me. Every data point, every flag, the full pattern analysis. I know, she said. She's going to have questions about your authorization, about the program, about things I can't answer for you. I can answer them, she said. Some of her questions might push into areas that are above my clearance, he said. Which puts me in an interesting position. Your interesting position, she said, is that you're the commanding general of an operation that was compromised. And the investigation into that compromise is going to be conducted by someone whose authority exceeds yours in this context. You're going to have to accept information about your own operation that you weren't given through official channels. Yes, he said. How comfortable are you with that? He looked at her. Brief expression almost wry gone before it could fully form. About as comfortable as I was when I walked in here and found you cleaning a pistol, he said. For the first time, something genuine moved across Evelyn Carter's face. Not quite a smile, but something in the neighborhood of one. A crack in the wall, small, controlled, real. You're handling it better than most, she said. I've had practice, he said. Special operations has a way of making you comfortable with the things you can't control. So does this, she said. She set the coffee cup down. She straightened in her chair. And she went back to watching the door. Because morning was coming. Marsh was coming. The investigation was coming. And somewhere on a desert road 40 minutes from nowhere, a man who had cost 17 people their lives was sitting in a dead vehicle with a dead phone, and the very beginning of the realization that the operation he thought he had run had, in fact, been run on him. The night held, the coffee went cold again. And Evelyn Carter, who did not exist in any system, who carried a trident nobody was supposed to know about, who had fired a rifle from a distance that wasn't supposed to be possible, sat in a forward command shelter and waited with the absolute, unshakable patience of someone who had been waiting her entire career for exactly this moment. She was not impatient. She had learned long ago that the truth always arrived eventually. It just needed someone willing to hold the line until it did. Deputy Inspector General Carolyn Marsh arrived at 5:47 in the morning, 13 minutes ahead of schedule, which told Whitaker everything he needed to know about how seriously Washington was treating this. She came in without preamble. No aide, just a woman in her 50s with close-cropped gray hair and the kind of posture that came from 2 decades of walking into rooms where powerful men had done terrible things and expected to walk away from them. Carried a single hard-sided case and a tablet, and she set both on the table without looking at anyone except Evelyn. She looked at Evelyn for a long time. Evelyn looked back. Commander Carter, Marsh said. Deputy IG Marsh, Evelyn said. Something passed between them, not warmth exactly, but recognition. The kind that exists between people who operate in adjacent classified spaces and know of each other without ever having been in the same room. You look exactly like your file, Marsh said. I don't have a file, Evelyn said. No, Marsh said, you don't. She set the tablet down and opened it. Which is why this conversation is going to be interesting. Whitaker stepped forward. Deputy IG General Whitaker, Marsh said, not looking up from the tablet. I've read your briefing. I have questions for you. But they come after. She looked up then, and her eyes moved to Hughes and to Voss. To stay or go? They stay, Whitaker said. Marsh considered that for exactly 1 second. Fine. She pulled out the chair across from Evelyn and sat down. Tell me about Sellers. Evelyn laid it out cleanly and fast. No editorializing. Facts. Sequence. Evidence. Pattern. The missing documentation. The 3 prior operations with anomalies. Timeline cross-reference. The engagement geometry from the previous night that confirmed advanced knowledge. The vehicle stop, the confirmation package still encrypted and waiting for Marsh's authorization to release. Marsh listened without interrupting. She made notes on the tablet with the efficiency of someone who had done this so many times that the mechanics had become invisible. When Evelyn finished, Marsh was quiet for about 15 seconds. The confirmation package, Marsh said. Release it now. Evelyn entered the code on the modified communicator. It'll arrive on a secure server. You have the address, Marsh. Typed something on the tablet. Waited, looked at the screen, read for 2 minutes. Room was absolutely silent while she read. When she looked up, her expression had not changed in any visible way. But something behind it had. Something had settled the way a person's face settles when a thing they suspected has been confirmed, and the confirmation is worse than the suspicion. 17, she said. Yes, Evelyn said. Marsh looked at Whitaker. Did you know about the prior anomalies? No, Whitaker said. His voice was controlled, but the single syllable carried everything underneath it. The after-action reports were filed through the standard chain, Marsh said, which means someone reviewed them and classified the anomaly observations at a level that prevented cross-referencing. Sellers had access to the classification review process for 2 of those 3 operations, Evelyn said. Marsh nodded slowly. He buried his own pattern. Selectively, Evelyn said. Carefully. Over years. Where is he now? Stationary on the road to the regional hub, Hughes said. Vehicle disabled. No communication capability. My people have eyes on the location. He hasn't tried to leave the vehicle? He got out once, Hughes said. Walked around it. Got back in. He's waiting for someone, Voss said from the corner. Everyone looked at him. If he ran a network for 11 years, he has contingencies, Voss said. He's not panicking in that vehicle. He's waiting for a pickup. Someone who was supposed to meet him after the mission confirmed. Marsh looked at Evelyn. Is that consistent with what you know about his operation? She asked. It's consistent with the profile, Evelyn said. A network that operated this long and this cleanly doesn't run on one person. There's infrastructure. There's support. Which means the vehicle stop may have done more than just prevent him from reaching the hub, Marsh said. It may have exposed his extraction plan, Evelyn said. Yes. Marsh stood up from the chair. She walked to the far side of the room, the same path Whitaker had paced twice already in the long hours before her arrival. She stood there for a moment with her hands clasped behind her back. I need surveillance on every vehicle and every communication originating within 20 kilometers of his current position, she said. Whatever is coming to pick him up, I want it identified before it arrives. That requires Hughes started. I have the authority, Marsh said, still not turning around. Make it happen. Hughes moved to the communications equipment, turned back to the room. Her eyes went to Evelyn again. The look was measured, evaluative, the look of a professional taking full stock of another professional. The program you were part of, Marsh said. I've seen references to it in 3 separate classified compilations. I've never seen the actual file. The actual file doesn't circulate, Evelyn said. Who holds it? The program director, Evelyn said. Assuming the program director is still alive, is he a pause? Evelyn said, and yes, Whitaker looked up. Voss looked up. Marsh did not change expression. The program director is a woman. The program director has been a woman since the 2nd year of its operation, Evelyn said. Took over from the original director when he retired. She has run it continuously since, and she's the one who contacted you, Marsh said. It was not a question. Evelyn held Marsh's gaze for a moment. I'm not confirming the identity of the contact, she said. What I'll confirm is that the contact was legitimate. The verification was valid, and the information I was given was accurate. The contact knew about this breach before it happened, Marsh said. Yes. Which means the contact has access to intelligence about Sellers' network that predates this operation. Yes. And they didn't bring it forward through official channels, Marsh said. What? Evelyn was quiet for exactly the right length of time. Long enough to mean something. Short enough to mean she had already decided to answer. Because official channels were the problem, she said. Sellers spent 11 years demonstrating that official channels could be monitored, influenced, and manipulated. Someone with knowledge of his network and a reason to protect that knowledge from his observation couldn't use any pathway he might be watching. She paused. I am a pathway he cannot watch, because I don't exist. Marsh looked at her for a long moment. That's either the most elegant operational security I've ever heard of, she said, or it's the most dangerous. It's both, Evelyn said. That's always been the trade. The surveillance results came in faster than anyone expected, because Voss had been right. Hughes turned from the communications equipment 40 minutes after Marsh gave the order, and the look on his face was the look of a man who has found something that makes a bad situation significantly worse. We have a vehicle, he said, inbound on the secondary road, 30 minutes out from Sellers' position. It's not military. It's not registered to any coalition contractor on the approved list. He looked at Marsh. Plates are agency. The room went very still. Marsh set her tablet down on the table slowly, with the deliberate calm of someone who has just been handed a piece of information that she needs to process before she reacts to it. Agency, she said. CIA. Hughes confirmed. The plate registration traces to a pool vehicle assigned to the regional liaison office. Whitaker's voice was very quiet. Sellers doesn't work for the agency. No, Hughes said. He doesn't. But someone at the agency is driving out to pick him up, Whitaker said. Someone who knew he was going to be on that road, Voss said. Someone who knew the mission ran last night. Someone who knew the timeline. Marsh picked her tablet back up. She typed rapidly. She looked at what came back and her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The regional liaison office, she said. Who heads it? Hughes checked. Senior case officer named Warren Delft. He's been regional liaison 4 years, Marsh said. Reading from her screen, he preceded the last anomaly operation by 7 months. She looked up. He was in post for all 3 prior anomaly operations. Voss exhaled through his nose. It's not just Sellers. It was never just Sellers, Evelyn said quietly. Every head turned to her. The documentation pattern I described, she said. The missing records. Some of what's missing doesn't trace to seller's access windows. It traces to a different clearance tier, a different processing channel. She looked at Marsh. I flagged it in the confirmation package. Section 4. Marsh went back to her tablet. Found Section 4. Read for 90 seconds. When she looked up, room felt different. Smaller somehow, the walls closer, the air heavier. You identified 2 actors, Marsh said. I identified 2 documentation patterns, Evelyn said. Consistent with 2 actors. I didn't have enough to name the second with certainty, Delft, Marsh said. Delft is consistent, Evelyn said. I flagged the pattern. The name is your determination. How long, Whitaker said. His voice had dropped to the register he used when he was trying to contain something very large. How long has Delft been part of this? Based on the documentation clustering, Evelyn said. Possibly from the beginning. 11 years, Whitaker said. Possibly longer, she said. The silence that followed was the kind that happens when the scale of something becomes clear all at once, not gradually, not incrementally, but in a single moment of terrible clarity when the full shape of it appears, and the people looking at it have to breathe through the impact before they can speak again. 17 operators, 3 prior operations, 2 actors, 11 years, and an agency vehicle 30 minutes away from completing an extraction that would have allowed the entire network to fold quietly and disappear. Stop the vehicle, Marsh said. On what authority? Hughes said. The agency. I have the authority, Marsh said, and the way she said it closed the question entirely. Stop the vehicle. Detain the occupant. Do it now. Hughes moved. Harder, Marsh said. Yes, the program director, Marsh said. The woman who runs the classified program. She sent you here knowing that this investigation would expose a network that reaches into the agency. Yes, Evelyn said. She knew what Delft was. She had enough to suspect, Evelyn said. Not enough to prove. That's why she needed the confirmation, and now she has it, Marsh said. Now you have it, Evelyn said carefully. The confirmation belongs to the investigation. Marsh looked at her. A long, assessing look. The kind that strips surface presentation and tries to read what's underneath. You're very careful about boundaries, Marsh said. I've learned to be, Evelyn said. Who did you lose? Marsh said. Question was unexpected, abrupt, personal in a way that didn't fit the professional frame of everything that had come before it. Whitaker looked at Marsh. Voss looked at Marsh. Even Hughes, from across the room, paused. Evelyn did not look away. First anomaly operation, she said, 7 years ago, before the program director identified the pattern, before we knew what we were looking at. She stopped for a moment. There was an operator on that team. He was part of the evaluation cohort, part of the program. He was one of yours, Marsh said. He was one of mine, Evelyn said. And he didn't come home. The room received that in silence. Whitaker understood now why she had said she had the work. Not as a philosophical position, as a fact. As the thing that was left after something else was taken. That's why the program director came to you, Marsh said. Not accusing. Just following the line to where it ended. He came to me because I'm the best person she has for this kind of operation, Evelyn said. Personal history was secondary. But it was there, Marsh said. It was there, Evelyn confirmed. Flat clean, not asking for anything. Marsh nodded once. She didn't push further. She was too professional to use grief as a lever and too human not to acknowledge it had been named. All right, she said. She turned to Whitaker. General, I need your formal cooperation on record for the next phase of this investigation. What we're looking at has moved from an operational breach to a long-term infiltration of intelligence infrastructure. Scope requires interagency coordination, and it requires it to happen in the next 2 hours before anyone inside that infrastructure knows what we have. You have it, Whitaker said immediately. The 11 personnel on the original list still need to be cleared, she said. The 4 with complete operational order access are the priority. Briggs and Olson need to be interviewed today. If either of them has any secondary connection to Sellers or Delft, I need to know it before this goes wider. I'll set it up, Whitaker said. 6 operators from Bravo Echo, she said. They cannot be debriefed by anyone outside this investigation until I clear the debriefing personnel. Not because I suspect them, because whoever is left of this network is going to know by now that the mission failed. They're going to be looking for information about why. Understood, Whitaker said. And Voss, Marsh said, looking at him directly for the first time. Voss looked back at her. Your team lead status means you'll be the primary debrief subject for the operation itself, she said. I'm going to need you available, and I'm going to need you to keep everything you've heard in this room inside this room. I've been keeping things inside rooms my entire career, Voss said. Marsh studied him for a moment. Good. She looked back at her tablet. Harder, I have one more question. Yes, the shot you made last night, Marsh said. 2,200 meters in darkness. Wind at 8 to 23 knots. She paused. The Barrett M82 has a manufacturer-rated effective range of 1,800 meters against point targets. Yes, Evelyn said. You exceeded its rated range by 400 meters, Marsh said. In degraded conditions. Yes, Evelyn said. The program documentation, Marsh said. The evaluation results. Is that level of capability recorded? It's recorded, Evelyn said. And classified above General Whitaker's clearance level, Marsh said. Yes, it classified above mine, Marsh said. No, Evelyn said. Then I'll be reading the full file, Marsh said, with the tone of a person making a note to themselves rather than a statement for the room. She closed the hard-sided case and stood. Whitaker. I need a separate secure space to conduct individual interviews. Away from this shelter. I'll arrange it, Hughes said. Now, not harshly, just precisely, Hughes went. Marsh looked around the room one final time at Whitaker, whose jaw had been set for so many hours it had probably begun to ache. At Voss, still in his corner, who looked like a man who had been running on anger and adrenaline for long enough that the fuel was beginning to thin. At the M82 against the wall, at the pin on the table. He looked at the pin for a moment. I've seen that symbol before, she said. In a reference in a document I wasn't supposed to be reading. What document? Evelyn said. A budget appendix from 8 years ago, Marsh said. Black budget. Something that had been misfiled in a congressional oversight package. I flagged it and returned it, and the person I returned it to looked at me like I'd handled a live grenade. Did you read it? Evelyn said. I read enough, Marsh said. I read enough to know that what the program found was not what the program was looking for. She paused. And I read enough to know that whatever decision was made about what to do with the results was made very fast, by very few people and with very little appetite for the implications. Evelyn held her gaze. You understand what was found, Evelyn said. It was not quite a question. I understand that the evaluation data challenged assumptions that the institution was not prepared to confront, Marsh said, and that burying the data was easier than confronting them. Yes, Evelyn said. And I understand, Marsh said, more carefully, that the person sitting at this table carrying a trident and an M82 is the result of a program that proved something and was then hidden because the proof was inconvenient. The statement landed in the room with the weight of something that had been true for a long time and had simply never been said aloud in a context where it could actually mean something. Whitaker was very still. Voss had his eyes on Evelyn. Evelyn looked at Marsh with an expression that was composed and direct and carried beneath it a complexity that anyone paying attention could see the layered weight of years of work done invisibly, capability proven in darkness, of a record that existed in a classified file nobody was supposed to read rather than in the open history where it belonged. The investigation will address the breach, Marsh said. The network. Sellers and Delft and whoever else is connected them, she paused. But when this is resolved, there's going to be a second conversation. About the program, about its findings, about what the institution chose to do with evidence it found inconvenient. That conversation is above my authority to have, Evelyn said. It's not above mine, Marsh said simply. She picked up her hard case and walked toward the door. The threshold, she stopped. She looked back at the room at Evelyn, specifically, and something moved briefly in her expression. Not sentiment. Something more durable than sentiment. The recognition of one professional for another, across a gap that had been constructed not by capability but by institutional convenience. Commander Carter, she said. Yes, thank you for coming out here. Evelyn held her gaze. She said. Marsh nodded once. I know, she said, that's the point. She walked out. The shelter felt different after she left. Quieter, but not in the way it had been quiet at 3 in the morning when the weight of the night was still settling. Quieter in the way of something that has crested a wave that has broken and is now pulling back, and in the pull you can feel the shape of what comes next. Whitaker sat back down. He put his elbows on the table and pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes for a moment, a gesture so unguarded that it made Hughes look away out of instinct, the way you look away when someone forgets they're being seen. He brought his hands down. He looked at Evelyn. Delft, he said.
Yes.
If Delft has been operational for 11 years, he said, then his exposure is going to reach into things that have nothing to do with this operation. Yes, she said. The agency is going to want to manage this. They're going to try, she said. Marsh can't protect this investigation from that kind of pressure indefinitely, he said. No, Evelyn said. She can't do it alone. Whitaker looked at her. I won't let them bury this, he said quietly. Whatever political pressure comes, whatever the agency tries to wall off, I have 6 operators in that medical bay and 17 names in my head that I will not let become administrative inconveniences. It was not a speech. It was not performance. It was a man telling a truth in the simplest way he knew how. And the simplicity of it was what made it land. Evelyn looked at him for a moment. "I know," she said. Voss moved from the corner. He walked to the table and picked up the coffee cup that had been sitting cold for the last hour, and drank what was left in it with a grimace that suggested he was not drinking it for the taste. "Sellers is still on that road," he said. "Yes," Hughes confirmed from across the room. "And Delft's vehicle has been stopped," Voss said. "Stopped and the occupant detained," Hughes said. "Marsh's team is on it." Voss set the empty cup down. He looked at the M82 against the wall. 2,200 meters, he said. Not to Evelyn specifically. Just out loud. "Working through something." Whitaker said. "My point man," Voss said. "Reyes. He's in the medical bay right now. He doesn't know why he's alive." He looked at Evelyn. "He's going to go the rest of his life not knowing the specific reason he didn't step left." "Yes," she said. "Is that hard?" Voss said. "That part of it. The part where the people you kept alive don't know you're the reason." Evelyn's considered the question with the same care she gave every question not performing consideration but actually doing it. "Sometimes," she said. "Does it get easier?" "No," she said. "But it gets less important. The math is simple. They're alive. Whatever else is true, they're alive." Voss looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded. Just once, the kind of nod that means a person has received something they needed without knowing they needed it. Outside, the desert was beginning to lighten at the edges. Sunrise yet, but the first suggestion of it, the slow, incremental brightening that precedes the thing itself. Another hour, maybe less. And with the light would come Marsh's full investigative team, and the formal interviews, and the beginning of the long, difficult process of dismantling something that had been built over 11 years and buried under layers of classification and institutional convenience. Evelyn reached forward and picked up the pin from the table. She held it for a moment. Then she put it in her pocket. Whitaker watched her do it. "You're not going to be in this investigation on paper," he said. "No," she said. "Everything you've provided, the confirmation package, the pattern analysis, the engagement confirmation, it enters through Marsh's chain. Your name doesn't appear. My name never appears," she said. "That bothers me," he said. She looked at him. "It should," she said simply. "But it's not your decision to make, and it's not mine either. Program makes that call." "The program director," he said. "Yes." "The woman who sent you here," he said, "who knew about Sellers and Delft and needed someone outside the system to confirm it."
"Yes."
"When this is over," he said, "I want to meet her." Evelyn looked at him steadily. "Mock along," she said, which was not a yes. But it was also notably not a no. The light outside kept growing. Somewhere on the base, people were beginning to move, the ordinary rhythm of a military installation waking up. Engines starting, voices carrying across open ground. The sounds of a day beginning that would contain things most of the people living it would never fully understand. Evelyn stood up from the table. She picked up her tactical jacket and put it back on. She zipped it. She picked up the secondary pistol she had been cleaning when Hughes first walked into the shelter, hours and a lifetime ago, and holstered it. She looked at the M82 against the wall, crossed to it, lifted it with the practiced ease of long familiarity, and began breaking it down for transport with movements so efficient and automatic they were almost meditative, the muscle memory of 10,000 repetitions expressing itself without effort. Whitaker watched her work. He watched the way her hands moved. Certainty of them. The absence of hesitation. A person doing something they have done so many times that the skill lives in the body rather than the mind. Something that cannot be faked, cannot be performed, can only be earned through years of the kind of work that nobody records. He watched her, and he thought about the file that was classified above his clearance. He thought about the results that had been found and buried. He thought about the trident on her chest and what it had cost and what the institution had chosen to do with the evidence of that cost. He thought about 17, he thought about 6. He made a decision. Not the kind that required orders or authorization or the formal machinery of military process. The kind that a person makes in the privacy of their own conviction, quietly, without announcement, with the knowledge that it will shape everything that comes next. He was not going to let this stay buried, not the breach, not the network, and not the program and what it proved and what the institution had chosen to do with proof it found inconvenient. He didn't know exactly what shape that decision would take yet. He didn't know what it would cost him. He knew that 4 stars provided considerable insulation from institutional pressure but not infinite insulation, and that what he was contemplating would test that insulation significantly. He looked at Evelyn, who was finishing the breakdown of the M82, with the calm, systematic focus of someone completely at home in the task. Thought, She has been carrying this alone for years. He thought, that ends today. He didn't say it. It was not the kind of thing that needed to be said yet. But the decision was made, and made decisions have a way of shaping the future regardless of whether anyone else in the room knows they've been reached. Evelyn secured the last component of the rifle case and clicked it shut. He looked up. For a brief moment, the two of them were simply looking at each other across the utility table, in a forward command shelter in the middle of a desert, at the end of a night that had changed more than either of them could yet fully calculate. Then Evelyn said, "The investigation needs you available. Marsh is going to have questions that only you can answer." "I know," Whitaker said. "Then you should get some sleep before she calls for you," she said. "Even an hour." "What about you?" he said. She picked up the rifle case. "I don't need much," she said. And that somehow was the most believable thing she had said all night. Sellers had been sitting in an interview room for 4 hours before Marsh walked in. Not because the logistics required 4 hours, because Marsh required 4 hours. She needed the documentation in order. She needed the cross-references confirmed. She needed the agency vehicle occupant, a junior CAS officer named Terrence Fowler, who had driven out to collect Sellers and who had immediately, on detainment, asked for a lawyer, and then stopped speaking entirely, prostrate and separated before Sellers knew he'd been caught reaching for his own extraction. 4 hours of silence and no phone, no contact. No information about what was happening outside. Marsh understood interrogation the way surgeons understand anatomy, not as a set of techniques but as a system. Isolation was not cruelty, it was calibration. 4 hours alone in a room with no information did more to a practiced deceiver than 4 hours of direct questioning. Because the deceiver's mind, without external data, began constructing scenarios, and scenarios were almost always worse than reality. And people who had spent 11 years building lies were particularly susceptible to the horror of not knowing whether those lies had held. She walked in with a single folder, a bottle of water, and nothing else. Sellers looked up when the door opened. He was a man in his mid-50s, lean, with the kind of unremarkable face that blended into any room, which Marsh had always thought was probably a professional asset. He looked tired. He looked like a man who had spent 4 hours deciding how to play something and had arrived at a position he believed was defensible. He was wrong, but he didn't know that yet. "Mr. Sellers," Marsh said. Sitting down, she set the folder on the table but didn't open it. He said. His voice was level, controlled. "I've been sitting in this room for 4 hours without explanation. I'd like to know what's happening." "You'd like to know what we know," Marsh said pleasantly. Sellers looked at her. Something moved behind his eyes, a micro-adjustment. Barely visible, the kind that happens when a person recalibrates their approach based on a single sentence. "I'd like to understand the basis for my detention," he said. "You were detained in the interest of operational security," Marsh said. "That's all the basis I'm required to provide at this stage. I'm an agency liaison." "You're a person of interest in an investigation," Marsh said. "Your institutional affiliation is noted. It doesn't change your status." Sellers was quiet for a moment. "What investigation?" he said. Marsh opened the folder. She turned it around and pushed it across the table so he could see the first page. It was a single document, a timeline, clean, clear, precise, his name at the top, 11 years of dates down the left margin. And beside each date, an entry, an operation, an anomaly, a documentation gap. Sellers looked at it. He didn't react, which was itself a reaction. A man who had nothing to do with what was on that page would have leaned forward to read it, would have asked questions, would have shown the natural confusion of a person trying to understand why their name was attached to events they weren't connected to. Sellers looked at it the way a person looks at something they already know the shape of. Flat. Contained. "This is a remarkable document," he said finally. "It is," Marsh agreed. "Where did it come from, the investigation?" she said. "You're going to need to be more specific," he said. "This represents an allegation of 11 years of operational betrayal resulting in the deaths of 17 U. Special Operations personnel," Marsh said evenly, without drama. Just the words "clean" and "clinical" landing on the table between them. Sellers breathed in through his nose. He looked at the document again. "I want a lawyer," he said. "You can have one," Marsh said. "But before we reach that point, I want to tell you something. Because I think you're a person who makes decisions based on complete information, and right now you're missing some." Sellers said nothing. But he didn't move toward the door. He stayed in his chair, which was the information Marsh needed. "Warren Delft is in federal custody," she said. The stillness that moved through Sellers was almost imperceptible. Almost. "Terrence Fowler has been processed and separated," she said. Been cooperative. That one landed harder. Marsh saw it in the slight tightening around Sellers' eyes. The confirmation package we hold includes communication intercepts, she said. Time-stamped. Authenticated, showing signal coordination between enemy forces and an external source during last night's engagement. She paused. We know the signal originated from inside the coalition network. We know the routing. We know the access credentials used. Access credentials can be falsified, Sellers said. His voice was still level, but it had changed texture. Something underneath it had shifted. They can, Marsh said. But the pattern of falsification is itself a signature. And the signature matches. She closed the folder. Mr. Sellers, I'm going to tell you how this is going to go. Not as a threat, as information, because you deserve to understand your position clearly before you decide how to respond to it. He looked at her. The network you've been running is exposed, she said. Comprehensively. Delft's cooperation, combined with what we already hold, gives us the operational structure going back approximately 8 years. The first 3 years of your operation are thinner. We have pattern evidence, but not the granular detail we have for the later period. Sellers was very still. What we're offering is a conversation, she said. Not immunity, not protection. A conversation in which you have the opportunity to provide information that helps us understand the full scope of what we're looking at. First 3 years. The contacts above Delft. The infrastructure that supported this for over a decade. She paused. The people who recruited you. Something changed in Sellers' face. Not a crack, not a collapse. Something more subtle, a shift in the interior position. The movement of a man who has just understood that the game he thought he was playing has been replaced by a different one with different rules. You think someone recruited me, he said. I think a network this sophisticated and this durable doesn't emerge from individual initiative, Marsh said. I think you were approached by people who understood what you could access and how to use it. I think you've been an asset for longer than 11 years. And that the 11 years we can document is the period after you were embedded deep enough to operate independently. She held his gaze. I think you've been carrying this alone for a long time. And I think some part of you has understood for a long time that when it ended, it was going to end badly. The silence stretched. Sellers looked at the closed folder. He looked at the water bottle on the table. He picked it up and drank, and when he set it down, the decision had been made. Marsh could see it. Not in anything dramatic, not a sagging posture or a sudden emotional release. Just a settling. The particular stillness of a person who has been holding something for 11 years and has finally, in a small plain room, put it down. I was approached in my 3rd year at the agency, he said. Marsh did not move, did not change her expression, did not do anything that might interrupt the thread. By someone I trusted, Sellers said. Someone I had worked with for 2 years. Someone who presented it not as betrayal but as he stopped. At the water bottle as a correction, as a counterweight to policy decisions he believed were going to cause more harm than the alternative. Who? Marsh said. Sellers looked up at her. He said a name, and the name he said made Marsh set her pen down on the table, very slowly, and look at him for a long moment before she spoke again. Say that again, she said. He said it again. Marsh stood up from the table. She walked to the door and knocked twice. The door opened. She spoke quietly to the person outside for 30 seconds. The door closed. She came back to the table and sat down. That name, she said carefully, refers to a person who retired from government service 6 years ago. Retired from official service, Sellers said. He remained active. Active in what capacity? I don't know the full scope, Sellers said. I was compartmentalized from everything above Delft. But the resources that came through the technical support, the communication infrastructure, the cover maintenance that doesn't come from 2 people operating independently. There's something above us, something organized, above Delft, Marsh said. Well, above Delft, Sellers said. Delft was a facilitator. He managed the regional logistics. But the decisions about which operations to compromise, which intelligence to pass, which outcomes to engineer, those decisions didn't come from Delft. They came from above. They came from above, Sellers confirmed. Marsh looked at him for a long moment. The name you gave me, she said. If we pursue that, we're going into territory that is going to create significant institutional resistance. I know, Sellers said. It's going to put you in a position where the people above that name will have strong motivation to ensure your silence. I know that too, Sellers said. He looked at the water bottle again. I've known for a long time that this was going to end one of 2 ways. I died with the secret, or I sat in a room like this and gave it up. He paused. I've had 11 years to think about which option I preferred. And he looked at her. 17 people, he said. I knew their names, not personally. But I knew their names. He stopped. His voice didn't break, but it came close. That's not a thing a person carries without cost. Outside the interview room, Hughes was waiting. He had listened through the monitoring feed. His face, when Marsh came through the door, was the face of a man who has had his understanding of the world significantly reorganized in the last 30 minutes. The name he gave you, Hughes said, is being verified, Marsh said. Right now, get me General Whitaker. He's in the secondary shelter, Hughes said. Slept about 90 minutes. Wake him up. Hughes moved. Marsh stood in the corridor for a moment with her hand pressed flat against the wall, not for support, but as a grounding gesture, the physical act of touching something solid when the things around you have become very complicated. The name Sellers had given her was not just a retired official. It was a name from a period of institutional history that she knew well, the early reorganization years, the post-conflict restructuring period when budget authorities had shifted and oversight mechanisms had been deliberately blurred and men with significant clearances and significant agendas had moved through the system in ways that the formal record did not fully capture. It was a name attached to programs, to decisions, the kind of influence that didn't retire when a person handed in their badge. It was, she realized with a clarity that arrived all at once and settled in her chest like cold water, a name that was going to take this investigation from a military breach case to something that reached the top floors of institutions she had spent her career trying to hold accountable. She pushed off from the wall and walked toward the secondary shelter. Whitaker was awake when she arrived. He was sitting at a folding table with a fresh cup of coffee and the look of a man who had not slept long enough but had slept with sufficient intention that the 90 minutes had done most of the work it needed to do. Evelyn was not there. Hughes had told her Evelyn had used a separate bunk space and given strict instructions not to be called unless the situation required it. Marsh did not call for Evelyn. Not yet. She sat across from Whitaker and told him what Sellers had said. The name. The context. The structure above Delft. The suggestion of an organized network that extended well beyond the operational layer they had been focused on. Whitaker listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. That name, he said. Yes. He was on the Oversight Committee, Whitaker said. 7 years ago. The committee that reviewed the budget reauthorization for classified special operations programs. He stopped. He would have had access to program documentation at a summary level, including classified program documentation, Marsh said. Whitaker looked at her. He would have known about Carter's program, Whitaker said. Yes, Marsh said. He would have. The implication of that settled between them slowly, the way large things settle not with a crash but with the gradual, inevitable weight of something finding its true position. He knew the program existed, Whitaker said. He knew about the evaluation results. He knew a classified operator had been developed outside the standard personnel system. He stopped again. His jaw tightened, and he's been running a network that targets special operations intelligence for 11 years. Yes, Marsh said. Did he know about Carter specifically? That's what I need to find out, Marsh said. And that's why I need her in the room. Evelyn came in without being briefed. Marsh had made that choice deliberately. She wanted the unmediated reaction, the read-in without preparation. She sat down across from Marsh, looked at Whitaker. Read the room in the way she read everything quickly, thoroughly, without showing the process. What happened, she said. Sellers talked, Marsh said. He gave us a name above Delft. Who? Marsh said the name. Me. Evelyn's face did something that Whitaker had not seen it do in the entire time he had known her, which was admittedly less than 12 hours. But in those 12 hours he had seen her hold steady through things that would have broken most people, and he had formed a working understanding of what her face did and did not do under pressure. Went very still. Not the controlled stillness she deployed habitually. A different kind. The kind that happens when something lands that the body registers before the mind has finished processing it. You know that name, Whitaker said. She breathed in slowly. He was on the Oversight Committee, she said. 7 years ago. I know, Whitaker said. He came to the program, Evelyn said. Not officially, an informal visit. The program director arranged it as part of the budget review process, a demonstration of capability, not a full disclosure of personnel or methodology. Demonstration, she paused. I was one of the operators who participated in the demonstration. Marsh leaned forward slightly. He saw you, Marsh said. He saw me perform, Evelyn said. Long-range evaluation. Target acquisition in degraded conditions. The demonstration was designed to show capability level without revealing program specifics. She stopped. But he was thorough. He asked questions. He wanted to understand the personnel selection methodology, The program director gave him limited information, but he understood enough to know what the program had developed, Marsh said. He understood enough, Evelyn confirmed. Her voice was level, but beneath it something was working, the careful, methodical processing of a person reorganizing a structure they thought they understood. 7 years ago, she said, the first anomaly operation. The one that she stopped. The one that cost you someone, Marsh said quietly. Evelyn looked at the table for a moment. The operation where the operator from the program didn't come home, she said. That operation had an anomaly. Enemy forces with advanced knowledge of the insertion route. She looked up. Meant 3 years trying to understand that anomaly. I went through every data set I could access. I never found the mechanism. Because the mechanism was above your access level, Marsh said. Because the network was already operational and already using infrastructure you couldn't see from where you were standing. He saw the program, Evelyn said. He understood what had been built. And then she stopped again. Something moved across her face, not quite grief, not quite fury, but the particular expression of a person who has just watched the last piece of a very old puzzle drop into place and discovered that the complete picture is worse than any of the partial pictures they had imagined. He used that knowledge, she said, the program, what it could do, what it meant that an operator existed outside the personnel system. Her jaw tightened. If you wanted to run a network that targeted special operations intelligence, knowing that a classified operator existed who could be deployed outside official channels and who couldn't be tracked through standard systems, that information would be valuable. Valuable how? Whitaker said. Because it tells you there's a mechanism for accountability that you can't control, she said. A mechanism that doesn't run through channels you monitor. If you're running a long-term penetration of special operations intelligence, the thing you fear most is exactly what happened last night. Someone enters your operational space from outside your visibility, and you have no warning and no countermeasure. Marsh was very still. He's been watching for you, she said. Evelyn looked at her. Not me specifically, she said slowly, but the program. Capability. He's known for 7 years that it existed. He's been running a network that systematically targets special operations intelligence. And the one thing that could unravel that network from the outside is a classified operator who doesn't appear in any system he can access. Which is why the program director was the right person to stop this, Marsh said. Because she controls the one asset the network couldn't account for. She didn't send me to stop a network, Evelyn said. Sent me to confirm a breach and protect the team. But she knew, Marsh said. She knew that if you confirmed the breach, the investigation would follow. And the investigation would lead here. The room processed that. Whitaker stood up. He walked to the far side of the space and stood there for a moment. And this time the pacing had a different quality, not agitation. But the movement of a man assembling something piece by piece, checking each joint for integrity. The program director sent Carter knowing the trail would lead to this name, he said. Not as a primary objective, as a consequence, because she knew the network was too large to stop at the operational level. You have to reach the top or you don't stop it. Yes, Marsh said. So this was never just about last night's operation, Whitaker said. Last night's operation was real, Evelyn said immediately. It's real operators, a real breach, a real engagement. I was there for those 6 people, General. That was not a pretext, I know, he said. But the program director designed this knowing it would go further. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. She designed this, knowing that stopping the network required evidence that could only be generated through an active operation, she said carefully. Provable, documented, witnessed breach. Something that gave an investigator like Marsh the foundation to pursue the full structure. She paused. To use the operation, she didn't create it. The breach was real. The threat to those 6 men was real. The shot was real. But the program director positioned the dominoes, Whitaker said. She positioned the person who could confirm them, Evelyn said. There's a difference. Whitaker looked at her. Is there? He said. Not genuinely. Evelyn held his gaze. Yes, she said. Because the alternative was letting the network continue. Letting it choose its next operation. Letting it cost 17 more names. She paused. She made a calculation. I won't tell you it was comfortable. I won't tell you it didn't have costs. But the calculation was this one confirmed operation, with a protected team, could generate the evidence that stops everything else. And you agreed to be part of that calculation, Whitaker said. I agreed to protect your team and confirm the breach, she said. I understood the larger implication. I accepted it. Because of the operator you lost 7 years ago, he said. He held very still. Partly, she said. And because you're the person who does this, he said. Because there aren't many people who can do what you did last night, and fewer who will, and the program director knows that, and you know it, and so you go. Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. Yes, she said simply, the honesty of it, the plain, unembellished acknowledgement, landed differently than any of the operational facts that had filled the room. It was the most human thing she had said, and it was the most costly to say, and she said it without flinching. Whitaker nodded. He looked at Marsh. The name Sellers gave us, he said. How do we proceed? Carefully, Marsh said, and fast. Because the moment this name surfaces in any official channel, the institutional pressure to contain it is going to be significant and immediate. I need to have enough documented and secured before that pressure hits that it can't be buried. What do you need? Everything Sellers has, she said. Full debrief. Every operation, every contact, every communication method. Going to take days. And I need Evelyn's confirmation package formally entered into the evidentiary record before anyone above my authority level can challenge its provenance. The provenance is going to be a problem, Evelyn said. A confirmation package from an operator who officially doesn't exist. I'll handle the provenance, Marsh said. I've been handling classified evidence with complicated origins for 20 years. What I need is your authorization to use it. You have it, Evelyn said. And I need a statement, Marsh said, on record from you. About last night, the engagement. What you observed. What you confirmed. Evelyn was quiet for a beat. My statement goes into a file that's above General Whitaker's clearance, she said. You understand that? I understand it, Marsh said. And I'm cleared for it. You've confirmed that. I've confirmed it, Marsh said. Your program director can verify if you need her to. Evelyn looked at her for a moment. Then she nodded. All right, she said, let's do the statement. It took 2 hours. Marsh conducted it methodically, working through the timeline from the initial contact 3 weeks earlier to the final shot in the engagement. Every data point, every observation, every operational decision and the reasoning behind it. Evelyn answered every question with the same clean precision she brought to everything, no elaboration where none was needed. Full detail where detail mattered, no deflection and no performance. Whitaker sat in during the first hour. Then, Hughes called him out for a communication from Washington, someone above Marsh's level, who had heard enough fragments to understand that something significant was in motion and wanted to understand the shape of it. Whitaker went to take the call. He took it in the secure shelter, and he was on for 40 minutes, and when he came back, his jaw was set in the way it had been set at 3 in the morning when the weight of everything first became clear. He walked into the interview room where Marsh and Evelyn were finishing the statement. We have a problem, he said. Marsh looked up. Washington knows something is moving, he said. Not the specifics, not the name Sellers gave us, but someone at the institutional level is already making calls. Asking about the status of the investigation, asking about personnel involved. Who is asking, Marsh said. Someone connected to the name Sellers gave us, Whitaker said. Someone who shouldn't know this investigation exists yet, because it was formally authorized less than 8 hours ago, and the authorization was compartmentalized. They have a source inside the authorization chain, Marsh said. Yes, Whitaker said. Which means the network has a second layer we haven't touched yet. Evelyn looked at the statement document on the table. Is it submitted, she said. Submitted and secured, Marsh said. Off-site. The moment I transmitted it, it was out of reach. Good, Evelyn said. He looked at Whitaker. How long before the institutional pressure arrives in a form that affects the investigation? Hours, Whitaker said. Not days. Then we have hours, she said. To do what? Hughes said from the doorway. He'd come in behind Whitaker, and his face carried the same tightened look, the look of a man watching something move faster than expected. To make the investigation undeniable, Evelyn said. Evidence that's submitted can be challenged if the investigator is removed. Evidence that's been shared widely enough becomes impossible to contain. She looked at Marsh. How many independent oversight bodies have concurrent jurisdiction over an interagency intelligence breach of this scope? Marsh was already thinking. 3, she said. Congressional Intelligence Oversight, the Inspector General's office at the agency level, and the Joint Interagency Review Board. If the confirmation package and Sellers' statement reach all 3 simultaneously, Evelyn said. Removing you doesn't remove the investigation. It just removes one investigator. That's a significant escalation, Marsh said. Yes, Evelyn said. Is it wrong? Marsh looked at the table. She looked at the statement document. She looked at the timeline in the folder 11 years. 17 names. The clean documentary evidence of a network that had operated inside the most trusted spaces in the American intelligence community. No, she said, it's not wrong. Then we have hours, Evelyn said. Let's use them. And the room moved, all of them. together, with the particular focused energy of people who have understood that the window is closing, and that what happens in the next few hours will determine whether the next 11 years looks like the last 11, or like something different. Something that 17 names deserved it to be. The transmissions went out at 9:43 in the morning. Marsh sent them herself, from a hardened terminal in the secure communications room, with Hughes standing at the door, and Whitaker standing behind her, and Evelyn standing off to the side with her arms at her sides, and her face carrying the particular stillness of someone watching something. Irreversible happen and understanding exactly what that means. 3 simultaneous transmissions, 3 oversight bodies. The confirmation package, seller's full initial statement, the pattern analysis, the engagement documentation, the cross-referenced anomaly timeline, and a formal investigative brief authored by Deputy Inspector General Carolyn Marsh citing active interagency intelligence penetration with documented casualties across 11 years of operation. When Marsh hit the final send command, she exhaled once through her nose and sat back. "It's out," she said. "How long before the institutional response?" Whitaker said. "It's already started," Hughes said from the door. He was looking at a secondary communications unit. "Washington is lighting up. I've got 3 calls holding for you, General. 2 of them are numbers I don't recognize." "Don't answer them," Marsh said immediately. "Not until I've spoken with congressional oversight directly." She stood from the terminal. "Who I talk to in the next 2 hours determines the shape of everything that follows. If the right people hear this from me before they hear a managed version from the network's remaining assets, we hold the frame. And if you don't reach them first," Whitaker said, "then we fight harder," she said simply. She picked up her tablet and looked at Evelyn. "I'm going to need you available for the next 4 hours in case any of the oversight contacts want direct confirmation of the engagement parameters." "I'll be here," Evelyn said. Marsh looked at her for a moment, the look she had been giving Evelyn at intervals throughout the night and morning, each time slightly recalibrated, as though every new piece of information required a small adjustment to the picture. "When this is resolved," Marsh said, "I meant what I said earlier." "About the second conversation." "I know you did," Evelyn said. "Program's findings," Marsh said, "the evaluation data, the institutional decision to bury it. That conversation is going to happen." "That conversation," Evelyn said carefully, "belongs to the program director. Not to me, it belongs to both of you," Marsh said. "What was proven by a person, not a program. The data doesn't exist without you." Evelyn held her gaze, said nothing. But she didn't disagree. The institutional response arrived faster than Marsh had projected. 50 minutes after the transmissions went out, a senior official from the agency's Office of General Counsel appeared at the forward base by helicopter, a response time that told Marsh everything she needed to know about how closely the network's remaining assets had been monitoring the investigation's movements. The official's name was Harrison. He was polished, composed, and carrying a document that he presented to Whitaker the moment he landed, with the smooth efficiency of someone who had prepared it well in advance. Whitaker read it, passed it to Marsh. Marsh read it. It was an administrative hold order, technically legal, citing ongoing agency operational equities in the investigation subject matter, requesting a 72-hour pause in investigative activity pending interagency coordination. Marsh folded it in half. "No," she said. Harrison looked at her with the measured patience of a man who expected this response and had prepared for it. "Deputy IG Marsh, the order is legally valid." Marsh said, "Was filed 47 minutes after I transmitted evidence of an 11-year agency intelligence penetration to 3 oversight bodies simultaneously. The filing timeline alone constitutes evidence of foreknowledge of my investigative actions, which is itself a matter of investigative interest." She handed the folded document back to him. "I'm not pausing anything. If the Office of General Counsel wants to pursue this, they can pursue it through congressional oversight, where the evidentiary package is already being reviewed." Harrison's composure held, but the eyes changed. "You've transmitted to congressional oversight," he said. 47 minutes ago," she confirmed. "Along with the Inspector General's office at the agency level and the Joint Interagency Review Board." Simultaneously, she paused. "The evidence is no longer in a position where an administrative hold affects its status." Harrison was quiet for a moment. "Miss Marsh," he said, "you understand that what you're alleging involves individuals at a level that requires exactly this kind of oversight." She said, "Yes, I understand completely." She looked at him steadily. "Is there anything else?" Harrison looked at Whitaker. Whitaker looked at him with the expression of a man who has made a decision and is completely at peace with the cost of it. Deputy IG has my full cooperation, Whitaker said. Whatever that requires. Harrison looked at both of them for a moment. Then he took the folded document back, turned, and walked toward the helicopter. Whitaker watched him go. That's not the end of it, he said. No, Marsh said. But it's the end of the easy part of their approach. From here they have to fight through official channels, which means they have to fight in the open. And fighting in the open, with what we've already submitted, is a different proposition. They have resources we don't, Whitaker said. They have resources, Marsh agreed. We have evidence. In my experience, evidence is more durable. She turned back toward the command structure. And Evelyn, who had stood slightly apart during the entire exchange, present but not central, the way she positioned herself in every room, watched the helicopter lift and held a thought she didn't say aloud, which was that durability was a matter of time horizon, and that evidence was only more durable than resources if the people holding it stayed standing long enough to see the process through. He looked at Marsh's back. Marsh was still standing. That was what mattered right now. Sergeant First Clominic Reyes found her 2 hours later. He had been released from the medical bay that morning, cleared, mobile, carrying the particular post-mission energy of a man whose body has processed adrenaline and arrived at something that felt like clarity, if clarity had an undercurrent of controlled rage. He had been told in general terms that the investigation into the operation was active and that he would be debriefed in due course. He had been told not to discuss the specifics of the engagement with anyone outside the authorized personnel list. What he had not been told was anything about why his team had walked out of those mountains alive when every failure point that should have killed them had somehow not done its job. Found Evelyn outside the secondary shelter, sitting on a supply crate with the M82 case at her feet and a cup of coffee in both hands, looking at nothing in particular with the focused inward attention of someone working through a long list of things in their head. Stopped in front of her. She looked up. He was a big man. Reyes. Wide through the shoulders, with a face that had been through enough that it had acquired a permanent quality of solidity, not hardness, but substance. He looked at her with an expression that was complicated in the way that combat veterans' expressions are often complicated. Multiple things present at once, none of them fully resolved. You were on the ridge, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes, she said. He was quiet for a moment. His jaw moved slightly. The way a jaw moves when a person is assembling something they want to say carefully. I was about to break left, he said, at the first contact point. I had the move in my head, secondary covered approach. Standard break contact. I was a second away from calling it. I know, she said. If I'd broken left, you'd have stepped into a prepared secondary position, she said. They were waiting on it. Reyes absorbed that. You saw it from the ridge, he said. I saw the setup, she said, before you hit the first contact point. I had time to calculate from how far, she told him. He looked at her for a long moment. His expression did something that moved through several phases. First, the flat, evaluative look of a man checking a number against his operational knowledge, then the slight widening that comes when the number passes the check and the implications land, then something more complicated and more human underneath all of it. My kids are 7 and 4, he said. His voice didn't break. But it was close. Not in the way that suggested weakness, in the way that suggested the exact opposite, that a man had taken a full accounting of what had almost happened and was holding it with the full weight it deserved. Evelyn looked at him. She did not say anything immediately. She let the statement exist without rushing to cover it with words, which was the right thing to do, and she did it because she understood from long experience that some things needed a moment of open air before they could be properly received. 7-4, she said finally. Yeah, good ages, she said. He made a sound that was almost a laugh. Short, rough. Yeah, he looked at her. I don't even know your name. No, she said. Are you going to tell me? She looked at him for a moment. Carter, she said. Just Carter. Just Carter, she confirmed. He nodded slowly. He looked at the M82 case at her feet. He looked at her hands around the coffee cup. He looked at the trident just visible at the open collar of her jacket. Just enough to see the shape of it. His eyes stopped on it. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he straightened. Not formally, not as a performance of military courtesy, but with the instinctive respect of a man who recognizes something real when he's standing in front of it. Thank you, he said. Just that, 2 words, without qualification or elaboration, delivered with the directness of a person who has learned that the things worth saying don't require dressing up. Evelyn looked at him. Go call your kids, she said. Something moved across his face. He almost said something else. Decided against it, nodded once. He turned and walked away. Evelyn watched him go. She held the coffee cup in both hands and let the warmth work into her palms. And she thought about 7 and 4, and she thought about the secondary kill zone, and the geometry of the engagement, and the 11 seconds, and the decision she had made at second 8. And she thought about how close the math had been, and how the margin between a man who went home to his children and a man who didn't had been measured in seconds and meters, and one shot from a ridge that nobody had thought to watch. She didn't let herself feel it fully. Not yet. There was still too much in motion, too many variables unresolved, too much of the machinery of consequence still running. But she registered it. She let it count. That was enough. The first confirmation from congressional oversight came at noon. Marsh took it in the secure communications room with Whitaker present, and when she came out, her face was the face of a person who has received news that is good but not simple. The kind of good news that means the work just became significantly more demanding. They're opening a formal inquiry, she said. Full scope. Interagency. The name Sellers gave us is now part of an active congressional investigation. Timeline, Whitaker said. Fast, she said. They want Sellers transferred to a federal facility today. Dealt separately. No shared custody chain. Agreed, Whitaker said. What about the network above them, the structure Sellers described? That's going to take time, Marsh said. Weeks, probably months. Congressional investigations don't move at operational speed. She paused. But they move. And now that 3 oversight bodies are formally involved, the institutional pressure to contain this has a ceiling. They can push up to that ceiling. They can't go through it. Harrison's going to push hard, Whitaker said. Harrison is going to push against 3 simultaneous investigations with evidentiary packages already in secure custody, Marsh said. Going to push very hard against a wall that doesn't move. She looked at Whitaker. Not over, not by a long distance. But the network has lost its operational capacity. Sellers is talking. Delft is in custody. The name above them is under formal investigation. Whatever they plan to do next, they can't do it with the same infrastructure. For now, Whitaker said. For now, she agreed. That's the honest answer. For now is what we have. Whitaker looked at the door. Carter, he said. She's outside, Hughes said. Get her in here, Whitaker said. When Evelyn came through the door, the room felt different than it had at any previous point in the last 18 hours. The exhaustion was still present in the set of Hughes's shoulders, in the lines around Whitaker's eyes, in the particular quality of Marsh's stillness that comes from a person who has been running on purpose and caffeine and is beginning to feel the full weight of both running out. But underneath the exhaustion, something else had settled. Something that felt like ground, like a floor that had been uncertain all night, had finally solidified enough to stand on. Marsh told her about the congressional inquiry. Evelyn listened, nodded once. The program director needs to be told, she said. I'll need to speak with her, Marsh said directly. I'll make that happen, Evelyn said. She'll cooperate with the investigation. She's been waiting for this for a long time. The program itself, Marsh said. Classification status, the evaluation data. In light of what this investigation is going to expose, the rationale for the current classification level is going to be difficult to sustain. Evelyn looked at her carefully. Meaning? Meaning that when the investigation is complete, Marsh said, going to be a review of every classification decision made in the relevant period by the relevant officials, including the decision to classify your program and its findings. She paused. Including the decision to classify you. The word landed differently this time than it had before. Earlier it had been a fact, a statement of operational reality, something that Evelyn had delivered and others had received. Now from Marsh. In this context, it had weight of a different kind. The weight of something that might change. That review, Evelyn said, is going to surface documentation that certain people would prefer to remain buried. Yes, Marsh said. That's rather the point. Whitaker was looking at Evelyn. She was looking at the middle distance the way she did when she was working through something not visibly, with any outward sign of process, just the quality of attention directed inward rather than at the room. The operator I lost, she said. 7 years ago spoke. If the classification review surfaces the anomaly documentation from that operation, she said, and the investigation establishes that the anomaly was a deliberate breach, a breach connected to the network we've been talking about all night, then his death is not a casualty. It's a homicide. The word was very clean, very precise. The right word, clinically selected. And it did what the right word always does. It cut through everything around it and left only itself. Whitaker's jaw tightened. Marsh looked at Evelyn with an expression that was not pity and was not sentiment but was something solid and direct. The expression of a person looking at another person and seeing them fully and not looking away. Yes, Marsh said, it is. Then the investigation needs to establish it, Evelyn said. Secondary matter. Not as a historical footnote. As a primary finding. I will make that commitment to you formally, Marsh said. On the record. Evelyn looked at her. Something moved in Evelyn's face that was not grief. Grief had a different signature. And Evelyn Carter had processed grief across 7 years in the way that operators process it, privately and thoroughly, until it becomes something more like ballast than wound. What moved across her face was something closer to the particular exhausted relief of a person who has been fighting for something important for a very long time and has just heard, for the first time, someone with the authority to act say "I will." Nodded once. "Clean and clear, all right," she said. Whitaker asked for an hour. Not to sleep, he was beyond the reach of a 1-hour sleep now, his system running on the particular high-functioning clarity that arrives at the far end of an all-night operation, when the decisions are made and the outcomes are in motion and the body has committed fully to staying upright until the thing is done. He asked for an hour because he wanted to do something before Evelyn left the base, and he wanted to do it correctly. He sent Hughes to arrange it. Hughes came back 20 minutes later and said it was arranged. At 1300 hours in the main briefing room of the forward base, operators of SEAL Team Bravo Echo stood in a loose line. They were cleaned up, mostly field-washed, in fresh uniforms, carrying the specific quality of presence that men have in the hours after a close call, when they are still aware of their own aliveness in a way that ordinary days don't generate. Reyes was at the near end of the line. He had known something was happening when Hughes told him to round up the team, and he had not asked questions, which was how Hughes knew Reyes was a professional. Evelyn stood in front of them. She had the M82 case in her left hand. Whitaker stood to the right of the line, and Marsh stood to the left, and Hughes stood at the door, and the room was plain and functional and not designed for ceremony, which was exactly right because what was about to happen was not ceremony. It was something older and simpler than ceremony. Whitaker spoke first. "Gentlemen," he said, "what I'm about to tell you is classified at a level that means you will not repeat it, discuss it, or reference it in any official documentation. What you hear in this room stays in this room." He paused. "What you're allowed to know is this: you are alive because of the person standing in front of you. Specifics of how and from where are classified. What is not classified is that the shot was real, the threat was real, and the margin between where you stand right now and a very different outcome was measured in seconds." The 6 operators looked at Evelyn. She stood straight still, the way she stood in every room present, complete, not performing anything. "Commander Carter," Whitaker said, "these men owe you a debt that the institution cannot formally record, and will not publicly acknowledge." He paused. "But I can acknowledge it, and they can acknowledge it, and sometimes that has to be enough." He looked at Reyes. Reyes looked at Evelyn. He brought his right hand up in a salute, not the crisp, formal salute of parade ground protocol, but the salute of one operator to another, deliberate and full, and carrying everything that gesture carries in a community where it means something beyond rank. The other 5 came up in sequence. 6 salutes. 6 men standing in front of the person who had held the line for them in the dark from a distance that shouldn't have been possible. Evelyn looked at them. She held for a moment, then she shifted the M82 case to her right hand, set it down at her feet, and returned the salute straight. Clean, nobody spoke. The moment was not long. Long would have been wrong. It was exactly as long as it needed to be, and then Reyes dropped his hand, and the others followed, and the room breathed again. "Dismissed," Whitaker said quietly. The team filed out. Reyes went last. At the door he stopped and looked back at Evelyn once more, with the expression that Evelyn recognized, the expression she had seen on the faces of people who want to say something they don't have the words for, and have made peace with the fact that they don't need words because the salute said it. He went through the door. The room was down to 4: Whitaker, Marsh, Hughes, Evelyn. Whitaker looked at Evelyn. "That's the closest the institution is going to get to saying what you did," he said. "Officially." "For I know," she said. "It's not enough," he said. "No," she agreed, "it's not, but it's today." She picked up the M82 case. "Today it's enough." Whitaker looked at her. "When this investigation is complete," he said, "and the classification review happens, I'm going to push for the program findings to be formally reconsidered. Not as a political statement. As a correction of a factual record that was mishandled. That's going to cost you something," she said. "Things worth doing usually do," he said. She looked at him. Something in her expression opened briefly, not all the way. Not in the way of a person who has let their guard down, but in the way of a person who has found unexpectedly that the room they're standing in is safer than they anticipated, and who allows themselves to register that fact. "I'll pass that along," she said, to the program director. "You do that," he said. A pause. "Carter," he said. "General, you said this morning that you have the work," he said. "That's what you have." "Yes," she said. "I hope," he said carefully, "that eventually you have more than that." She looked at him for a long moment. "I hope the same thing for you," she said, and then, with a precision that only a person paying very close attention would have caught, "General." It was the first time she had added his rank at the end of a sentence to him rather than at the beginning. It was a small thing, the kind of small thing that means nothing between strangers and everything between people who have spent 20 hours building something real in a very compressed space. Whitaker understood it. He nodded. She left at 1400 hours. No ceremony. No formal departure. She walked out of the forward base the same way she had arrived, without announcement, without escort, with the M82 case in her hand and the weight of the work in her posture, and nothing about her that would attract attention from anyone who hadn't spent the last 20 hours learning exactly what to look for. Hughes watched her go from the doorway of the command shelter. He turned to Whitaker. "Will we see her again?" he said. Whitaker thought about the program director, about the investigation, about the classification review Marsh had committed to, about the conversation that was going to happen, the second conversation, the one about what had been proven and buried and what the institution owed to the truth of it. "Yes," he said. He was certain of it in the way that people are certain of things they cannot fully explain, not from data, not from logic, but from the understanding that some things are not finished, and the people central to them cannot walk away until they are. "Yes," he said again. "We'll see her again." 48 hours later, Sellers was in federal custody in a facility that was not on any public roster. Delft was separated, lawyered, and silent in a different facility. The name above them was under formal congressional investigation, with 3 committee members who had read the evidentiary package calling for a full interagency audit going back 15 years. Harrison had filed 2 more administrative challenges. Both had been rejected within hours by oversight bodies that now held the evidence and had no institutional incentive to accommodate the network's remaining pressure points. The investigation was not over. It would not be over for months. The institutional resistance was real, the political complexity was real, and the full scope of what Sellers had begun describing in his extended debrief, the infrastructure, the contacts, the engineered outcomes, was going to require the kind of sustained, careful adversarial investigation that the system only managed to produce when the evidence was already too wide to suppress. The evidence was already too wide to suppress. Marsh had made sure of it. Whitaker had made sure of it, and Evelyn Carter, who existed in no official record, whose name appeared in no document that would ever be declassified in the ordinary way, whose trident and her shot, and the 11 seconds that had saved 6 men, were known only to the people who had been in that room, had made sure of it from a ridge at 2,200 meters in the dark. 3 weeks after someone who understood what she was capable of had decided to trust her with the thing that needed doing. The world would not know her name. The world did not need to. 6 families would eat dinner together that night, 7 and 4 years old, and the other combinations of ages and faces that lived in the homes of 5 other operators, all of them unaware of the specific mathematics that had kept their people alive, all of them simply and completely in possession of the thing that mattered. 17 names would be formally entered into the investigative record as victims of deliberate, coordinated betrayal, not casualties of war, not operational losses, but men who had been murdered by the infrastructure that was supposed to protect them. That was the reckoning. That was what the 20 hours had built. Not a headline ceremony, not the kind of public accounting that the world could see and touch, but a formal, documented, legally anchored truth that could not be made to disappear, held in the hands of institutions that had been given enough evidence to be forced to act. And somewhere outside the wire, moving through terrain she had spent a career learning to read, Evelyn Carter carried the M82 and the pin and the work forward into whatever came next, not because the institution had asked her to, not because the record would show it, not because anyone watching would understand what they were seeing, but because 6 men were alive and 17 names deserved justice, and the ghost operator never stopped until the mission was truly done.